Hello. Welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. This is quite a book. The Last Warlord. We've heard. This is the most graphic interpretation of Warlord that any one of us could ever have. This young man, and I do mean young, I can't believe all the things you've done and you don't have gray hair. Brian Glyn Williams, PhD and all those good stuff, and a professor at Dartmouth, and you are a student of Islamic study. Why?
It sort of began with a journey as a young man. I was fortunate to get a semester abroad when I was about 19, and I chose to spend the semester in the Soviet Union, in Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev, and I met some Mongol Muslim Uzbeks from deep in the heart of Soviet Central Asia at a train station in Leningrad, and I just fell in love with the exotic nature of the Islamic world at that young moment as a kid. It was almost like my epiphany. So since then, I've been exploring it and trying to be a bridge between the lands I visit, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and my kids, my students at the university.
Well, I think you did a very good job, because as I said to myself, warlord always meant mean, awful, hateful, and shoot people. And you make them real people with joy, happiness, and tragedy, just like we do. And they so sincerely believe in their cause that they will lay down their life. And I'm not sure we could ever feel that threatened and that scared. And then you hear the people say, I read the book, but I like the movie better, or I like the movie. No, I saw the movie halfway through the book. And that's where the movie starts. Mm-hmm. Only the last 200 pages. And I'm grateful that you introduced me to him, his family, where he started as a peasant farmer, and how he, under very tough circumstances, raised himself up to Warlord Dostum, and you met him.
Yeah, so it was a journey, as you said, to find out who are these warlords for real. The movie 12 Strong sort of captures him to a degree, but as you said, it begins halfway through my book.
Yeah,
there's a lot more background context.
Read the book. If you saw the movie and you liked it, read the book. You'll like it even better.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. And I wanted to go there and find out who these warlords were in real three-dimensional human terms. And I got a grant from my university. Didn't know the guy in advance, and I was, to be honest, scared shitless.
Yeah, I would imagine you would be. You were how old were you?
Boy, I was about 32, 33, and I got this grant to fly to Afghanistan and try not just meeting this warlord who had overthrown the Taliban. He was a blood enemy of the Taliban. His tribe are Mongols, and they're blood enemies of the Taliban, who are Aryans from the south. I wanted to not just bring him to life and flesh him out as a real character. How do you come to power? How do you lose his wife? What does it mean to be a man who fights for 30 years and leads his ethnic group as their top commander? But also to find out what was his role in overthrowing the Taliban regime back in 2001. We didn't have any real images from that invasion, that overthrow, because it was done by the CIA.
Mm-hmm. And you worked with the CIA?
I did. I was hired in 2007 to move around the country tracking suicide bombers, Taliban suicide bombers. Taliban, Al-Qaeda suicide bombers were wreaking havoc in the southeast and in the capital at that time. And I had been doing research on Taliban suicide bombing before this. And when the scourge hit, the CIA hired me to try finding out their targeting patterns. A hard target, a military, or soft civilian, what time of day, what roads, where does this tactic, ideology come from, etc.
And you did that in your head or with an algorithm on a computer?
Well, I did it on the ground and at home. First of all, I charted out every single bombing at home with algorithms, a matrix, where they took place, what time of day, what was the target, and that gave me more questions than answers. I had the spatial dimensions, but I didn't have my finger on the pulse of those who are doing it. And that's what going on the ground does. My specialty is to go on the ground in, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, not to stay at home in the safety of the ivory tower and do what I call wicked intel, Wikipedia intelligence, remote research. You have to go on the ground there.
It shows in the book, but did doing that add a second fear and scary to being there?
Absolutely. When you're focused so intently on a tactic that's killing thousands in Afghanistan, this suicide bombing campaign, and you're aware of just how they operate and how deadly they are and how ubiquitous and everywhere they are, it makes you a little nervous when you're driving around the country or walking the streets as an American, trying to blend in, and you realize you could be a target.
Now, did you look like an American or a soldier or a covert operator?
More covert. I grew my beard longer. I wore a Afghan robe, shalwar kameez. I drove a nondescript, low-profile Toyota Corolla. So I tried to blend in to make myself as less of a target as possible. But the fear loomed over you. After a long time on the ground there, you became slightly paranoid.
Do you have a guard? Do you have a backup?
I had one friend of mine, a Pashtun named Humayun. The two of us had pistols in our seats, and then we just drove around trying to be as low profile as possible.
How were your parents feeling about that?
Yeah, well, my poor, long-suffering parents, they're the ones who encouraged me to travel and see the world. My father is Welsh, and we traveled from Wales to continents, to France and Germany and Greece and Italy, Turkey, and they encouraged me to travel. But I don't think they knew I'd be going to war zones.
Probably
I
not.
think they're always a little nervous and afraid when I go, and insist I don't go again when I come back.
I was going to say, when you go, are you going to go again?
Probably this January. I'm going to Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan.
Wow, and how does family feel about that?
I usually don't tell them in advance.
You send them a note from there, I'm here and I'm safe and sound?
Well, my dad joined Facebook, and about a year and a half ago, I ended up in Iraq, and I forgot he was on Facebook with me, my Facebook friend, and all of a sudden he sees pictures of me on the front lines with some Kurdish troops outside Mosul, and I got this shocked email with, Brian, are you in Iraq?
Yeah, right. I had went travel around the world, and I couldn't reach her, and when I finally did, I said, how come I couldn't get a hold of you? She says, because Mommy, I just jumped out of an airplane. It was wicked cool, awesome over Africa. And I said, you sat at my kitchen table and checked off that you were going to jump out of an airplane over Africa. And she said, Mommy, I don't tell you everything.
It's for your own benefit.
Afterwards. Now, the unique thing, and people who have been to the World Trade Center have seen the sculpture of the horse. And Dostum was a horseman, and his horses were unbelievable. And when is it Decker that got there first? The Green Berets landed, their counterparts were making fun of them because they had all this technology and whoopee-ding stuff, and they were told they had to ride horses, and the laughter, the discouragement, but those horses proved unbelievable, didn't they?
Yeah, that's the fascinating aspect of this story, that we fought this war as 21st century warriors with laser-guided bombs, satellite imagery, laser snipers, etc. But the real reason we won was we relied upon local Uzbek Mongol horsemen to charge out of the mountains, shooting AK-47s from the hip and charging into Taliban ranks. And it was this almost synergy that was created between satellite-guided bombs that are being dropped before these Mongol horsemen, seemingly from the Middle Ages, that led to this joint victory. And it was a victory of 2,000 Mongol horsemen with a blood feud against the Taliban long before 9/11. And this one brave team of 12 Green Beret Special Force soldiers that together fought together in this hidden mountain zone, CIA-led, and overthrew the Taliban in just 60 days with only one casualty, one American casualty.
And the captain, newbie, first time on the ground, in battle, was a horseman. He'd grown up on a ranch, so he was comfortable, but those other 11, they weren't thrilled.
Well, that's so true. I mean, the captain is a dear friend of mine, Captain Martin Nutch, and he's from Kansas. And he grew up on a farm, on a ranch, and he was a rodeo rider. And so he knew intimately how to ride horses. So when he and his A-team, his Green Beret team, were flown high in the rebel-held mountains to unite with this warlord, a pro-American warlord, General Dostum, he found out they're all riding horses to get everywhere because there's no roads and they're up at 8,000 feet. And he taught the rest of his team how to ride. but certainly it's not in the Green Beret Manual to wage cavalry warfare.
No, but the horses, anyone who loves horses will know, but the horses were as strong a soldier as Dostum's people and our soldiers. I mean, they could have a bomb go off 5 feet away from them, and if they lived through the blast, they didn't move. And they responded to every call that these men asked them to do.
Yeah, the horses are unique. You know, I've ridden horses as a child in Wales in the mountains, friends in Texas. I've never seen horsemen like this. These are the descendants of Genghis Khan's world-conquering nomadic hordes. It's riding horses isn't in our blood. They're taught to ride horses from childhood, and they wage really intense, rough, dangerous war games on horseback to train them to be hard warriors.
They're unbelievable.
Yeah. So
what type of horse is he? A quarter horse, a Morgan, Budweiser?
Yeah, well, not Clydesdales. They're these furry little, tough, hardy steppe horses that come from Mongolia. And they're not glamorous like, say, the Arab stallions. They're not high maintenance like an Arab stallion. They are just hardy, tough, and they get the job done. And they're trained for warfare. I mean, they're trained to go into the sound of combat, to not flinch when bombs go off, and to keep going when people are dying around them or on their own backs.
Well, it was heartbreaking when they fell.
Yeah, well, a lot of horses and the horse riders were killed in these cavalry charges. You know, they had 2,000 horsemen who took on the Taliban with U.S. bombs helping them, and all those 200 horsemen, over 800 died. So almost 50% of the men fighting in the mountains never came back. Brothers, fathers, uncles were shot off their saddles by the Taliban machine guns, and they buried them on the spot and kept riding and came back for their bodies later on.
And they respectfully, much like their hospitality, which with bombs going on, you had to sit and have tea. You had to be welcome, no matter whether you were in a cave or a bunker or an open land. And they bathed their dead. They prepared them for burial. They didn't diminish their civilian belief because they were in the soldier mode.
No, I mean, it's very important in Islam to be wrapped in white cloth, to bury quickly facing Mecca. And even though, you know, we sometimes have this tendency to paint in broad brushstrokes, you know, all Muslims are this, or Trump wants to ban Muslims from all these countries in broad, brushstrokes. You know, these are Muslims who fought and died long before 9/11 trying to destroy this terror scourge. So even though they are Mongols, they are Sufi mystical Muslims, and they found the Taliban to be more of an abomination than we did. And General Dostum, the warlord, told me one day, he said, "Brian, you always say 9/11 was the day the world will never forget." He goes, "Well, we had 5 years of Taliban conquest and occupation. We had the 5 years our people will never forget. They stoned our women, they crushed their skulls, they cut their fingers off for having fingernail polish, they burnt our schools, they burnt our crops, they killed us in the tens of thousands. It was a blood feud, and we overcame them with your help. And for that, we'll always be thankful to America."
Thank you for telling how lucky he was to have married his first wife and championed women and wanted them to have that freedom, wanted them to be able to, and he valued her counsel and how important she was to him when he finally got home, which wasn't any too often. But what a sorrowful way that she passed.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that I wanted to humanize warlords, and in the process, I asked him, who was the most important influence in your life? And he said, my wife, Khadija.
Yeah.
And he fell in love with her when they're young, which doesn't always happen in Afghanistan. Often you have arranged marriages. And she was educated, he wasn't. She taught him a lot, she trained him to appreciate women, and he became a pro-women's rights warlord. So these stereotypes we have of warlords all being this or that are shattered when you meet them. He's very proactively building girls' schools in the North still. He's built roads for traffic. He's sent lots of young people to study abroad and come back and bring their skills for his people. He's secular, he's a moderate, and as I said, he fought for women's rights on the battlefield long before 9/11.
But you don't get that in the movie.
Right.
That's in the first 3/4 of the book.
Yeah.
Which I'm sorry that they didn't choose to elaborate on, because it's important when you think of him. Now, he's still alive?
He is indeed. He's now vice president, and he invited me to join him this August on his return from exile. He's almost killed in an ISIS terror attack, a suicide bombing at the time. but he's still vice president. And I actually saw the movie at the red carpet premiere in Manhattan with his son by my side.
Wow.
And it's fascinating having the son of the man who's in the movie. And there's only one scene in the whole movie when the whole audience in this giant theater applauded. That's when his father shoots the Taliban commander with his gun. And I was by his side, and when it's over, I said, Batur, what do you think about the way your father was presented in the movie? And he said, he honored me and my people, were grateful, and he had tears in his eyes.
Good enough. How old is he?
He's now about 32, the son. And the father was born in 54, so I can't do the math. But,
Still a kid.
Yeah, in his 60s.
Still a kid. And you wrote it overseas.
Yeah, so I wrote the book on the shores of Turkey. I was married to a Turkish woman from Istanbul, and her family lived in this little hamlet, little coastal cove facing the Greek islands. And every summer I go there and do research, quote unquote. Really, I'd be doing jet skiing and playing volleyball and eating calamari. And in the interim, I would write the book in this beautiful, idyllic Mediterranean setting.
And did you have any input into the movie, or when you sign it off, do you just lose all control?
Well, I was fortunate to be there on the movie set. They chose a movie set just south of Santa Fe in New Mexico, and it felt just like Afghanistan. And I got there and I was able to contribute on things like costumes. No, don't do costumes like Arabs in Morocco in the desert. These are Mongols at 8,000 feet in the parts of the Himalayas, the Hindu Kush. Certainly that was gratifying, and certainly the book gave a lot to the movie. The director, Nikolai Fugelsig, thanked me and said, listen, half the movie came from the book. And certainly I think the depth of the character of Dostum was important. They're going to have Dostum, the warlord, as almost a backdrop for white American heroics. These Rambos come in and free these benighted Afghans, and to have him fleshed out as a character in his own right. I told him, listen, I want him to be like Omar Sharif was to Peter O'Toole in Lawrence, Arabia.
I mean, that could be another whole movie. If you did the first 3/4 of the book, his life story is unbelievable in itself.
Yeah, and I think the movie 12 Strong, it went to number 2 in the box office in January and February. It got beat by Kumanji or some movie that went to number 1. I think they didn't have the time to really bring him to life in 3 dimensions in the movie the way my book can. Obviously I got to know the guy personally and live with him for a couple summers and get to meet his enemies, interview his Taliban prisoners of war, the women who he freed, villagers. And you have the time to do this sort of character development in a book that you don't necessarily have in a movie like 12 Strong, because it's too fast-paced, and Americans
don't want to sit for 2.5 hours. They want the story and they want the boom.
Yeah, and the bombs, and there's a lot of bombs in the movie, and there's one thing in the movie that I found interesting. I know the Green Berets who fought alongside Dostum, and in the movie, they're leading the charges. In actuality, it was Uzbeks, the Mongols, who led the charges. And it's ironic because the Green Berets are known for going in and leading from behind, giving a local face to the campaign while they direct it from behind. Where in the movie is the inverse. Chris Hemsworth leads from the front.
Without letting anything out, the last scene where those 30 missiles are blowing up the cliffs above them to bury them in rock, where the horses proved their invaluableness, he hesitated. He thought that Dostum was nuts going down there. And as soon as he saw himself, and what came through to me in the book is to know the history. And I've always heard, if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat it. That was valuable in figuring out which one was a suicide bomber. You had to have historical knowledge of what they looked like, what their traits were, how they traveled, and to not have included that in the movie, I think diminishes the story. So thank you for putting it in the book.
Well, thank you, and for noticing that. And there's one scene in the movie that I watched with Dostum's son, wherein General Dostum leaves the battle because he's angry about the Americans allying with another warlord, and that never happened. Dostum was always the Patton. The CIA called him the General Patton, who led from the front, and he never, held back in battle, and he drove the Americans hard and fast. The battle plan was his plan. This operation by these 12 Green Berets and this Mongol warlord who befriended them, it transcends not just faith and countries and religion and ethnicity, but it transcends time and space. You have a Mongol from the Middle Ages come up with a battle plan to capture an ancient shrine which will break the fighting spirit of the Taliban. And the Americans believe him enough to follow through on conquering what I call the Afghan Vatican. And that's remarkable, that you have this friendship forged between a Muslim Mongol and a guy from Kansas. And they're friends this very day, Mark Rich and Dostum.
But there were so many different ethnic groups. I literally had to write them down in a notebook so I knew who was who. And they switched sides overnight. And Dostum would win, and a week later they'd get it back. And how many times had they fought and won until the Americans came in, and they finally won for more than 30 days. That had to be heartbreaking, to give up so much and work so hard only to see the Taliban take something over once again.
Yeah, well, I call Afghanistan a Game of Thronesistan. You know, it is so fluid, and it's such a dangerous neighborhood. And you know, we like to think that all Muslims are Arabs, for example, but only 20% of the Muslim world are Arabs. Afghanistan is full of these ethnic groups who are Muslim, but not Arab. Dostum's group are Mongols. The Taliban are Aryans. Another Warlords tribe are Persians.
There you go. This is why I had to write them down, so that I could remember who was who and who was on first.
You know, it is that complex beauty of the ethnicity that I love about Afghanistan. You know, being in that country is something primordial. You know, I've traveled all over Europe, Middle East, but Afghanistan, it was never colonized. It was never modernized. It's not just going to another country. It's going to another time. You know, you see nomadic tribes migrating in the mountains, castles built by Alexander the Great's troops, and there's no Americana. You know, no KFC in Afghanistan. It's very ancient.
Well, I can't encourage our viewers enough to read the book. I learned a tremendous amount. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You did a good job in humanizing Warlord. They're not all bad. They're people. And they believe in what they were brought up to believe in as much as we do.
Yeah, and I think when you see these people defending their women, their tribe, their nation, their God, their beliefs, it reminds me of Americans doing the same thing, you know, under George Washington, or fighting the Nazis.
Or the flag.
Yeah, the flag. They're fighting for their people, and that's important.
Did he ever come to America?
He did. And this is important. He came to America before 9/11 to make an oil deal. So he saw the World Trade Centers. So when he heard that the Taliban's guest, Al-Qaeda, had blown them up, he gathered all of his horsemen in the mountains there at 8,000 feet on September 12th, 2001, and said, the Americans will be coming. They will want revenge.
Now we're going to break for a minute or two, and then you're going to read us so that the viewers can get a first-hand experience of how well you write.
Thank you. Look forward to it. So I'm going to read a passage here that comes from a battle scene that took place up in the mountains as these American Green Berets joined General Dostum's Uzbek Mongol horsemen and watched them charge into combat as American bombs land to help them wage war against the Taliban. General Dostum decided to begin the battle with 2 frontal charges of 250 Uzbek Mongol horsemen, riding straight into the enemy's hardened positions. Dostum asked the Americans to soften up the Taliban's lines with one last air bombing. The men and horses were nervous as a final bombing took place and echoed up the valley. Then, as clouds of smoke and dust rose from the enemy position, General Dostum gave the order for the charge, and the men and horses leapt into action. The valley rumbled with the sound of 1,000 Uzbek horses charging 1,500 meters directly into Taliban and Al-Qaeda lines. Colonel Bart Decker and his Green Beret team watched the final charge from the safety of the heights with General Dostum, who spoke by radio to Commander Lal, who led the attack. At the time, Colonel Decker thought to himself, my God, we're witnessing a cavalry charge almost as if in the Middle Ages. According to Colonel Decker, the Uzbek Mongols rode like men driven. And there can be no doubt that they believed they were acting in fulfillment of ancient legends. Just like their 15th century ancestors had, they charged straight into enemy projectiles while shooting their own weapons from the saddle. It was a magnificent sight that few Americans ever expected to see in their lives. Colonel Decker and his Green Berets held their breath as the mounted Uzbek daredevils rode straight into the teeth of Taliban machine gun fire. Only on this occasion, the Uzbek horsemen's momentum was not enough. Dozens of their men were mowed down and died, and the Taliban cheered in victory.
You write it like you were there. You can almost smell the smoke from the missiles, and they were happy to die. They had died doing what they believed they were here for.
Yeah, I think they died for the future of their people, to free them from tyranny, to liberate them from these oppressors who turned their lands into a dark Taliban Sharia Islamic law prison camp.
Well, you told this story very, very well.
Yeah,
thank you
very much.
Will you write again? Will you write another one?
I have 2 books coming out next year.
And this is the 7th?
This is the 7th, yes.
2 books. Will you
Yes.
come twice and tell me about them?
I'd be thrilled to.
Oh, we'll be
Absolutely.
glad to have you. The book today is The Last Warlord, and Mr. Williams has been my guest. Good, knowledgeable read. Bye now.